get started, inshallah. نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيد المرسلين، يا خاتم النبيين، يا شفيع المذنبين، يا أنيس الغريبين، يا رحمة للعالمين، صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. Inshallah, last week we started talking about the Khilafah of Sayyidina Ali, Karamallahu wajh. And this is a topic and a period of time that gets ignored a lot as far as in Islamic discussions and stuff. And in the past, it was one of those things that you could get by without knowing too much about, still understanding the basics of the position of Ahlul Bayt. But with the internet and all the misinformation, disinformation, and everybody talking, it's one of those things that even the common person now needs to have some foundation in. Otherwise, various groups can come and confuse people very easily. But it's also important, as we mentioned last week, because all of this relates to what is going on within the Ummah and from outside the Ummah today. And there are certain points that I'm going to come back to multiple times, reiterating points, feeling like a broken record, where I just kind of keep saying certain things over and over, because those things need to be entrenched within us. Otherwise, the previous scholars used to say, for the common man not to study this. Who? Again? Baya. आवाज आ रही तुम्हारी.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Tire went flat. Yeah. All right. So, but it is one of those things even now that needs to be studied under the guidance of someone who a scholar who understands the situation, and more importantly understands the status of the companions, because that's who we see fighting here, are the companions of Rasulullah. So that's very important to understand that. So I'm going to start off today with, again, the basic definition of Sahabi, the companion of Rasulullah, because this is important to understand. It's something I'm going to start with. I will probably end with again today. I will probably start off next week with it as well, because it's that important. And then there's other things that we're going to discuss as well today, inshallah. So Sahabi is under, I guess the common definition people throw out is a companion of Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But from an Islamic standpoint, what that means is someone who saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with Iman, okay, and he died on that Iman. And that's important catch to understand, that he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with faith, and he dies on that same faith that he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with. And the reason I have to emphasize that here, and there are other things that we'll emphasize, but that part here that I'm emphasizing right now is because there were people who, after you have all of Arabia coming into Islam, accepted Islam, they saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but then shortly after he passed, when all of Arabia became apostated, other than Hijaz, they fell into that. Okay. But then during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr, some of them were killed, so they died as disbelievers. But then some of them came back into Islam. However, even though they came back into Islam and they died on faith, they lost the status of Sahabi because they didn't die on that faith. that they saw Rasulullah with. Okay. So that's one important point to note. The other point to note is that when we say that they saw Rasulullah with Iman, doesn't specify the age. So the age doesn't matter. And the only reason I have to emphasize that is because there are people, when you talk about Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein al-Islam, the grandsons of Rasulullah, try to take him out of being Sahabi. Oh, they were too young. Then they want to redefine Sahabi as someone who was baligh, who was of age, who saw the Prophet. But that doesn't count. Because those same people will talk about other people as Sahabi, who aren't from the household, but then they want to exclude Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein al-Islam. So that's a deliberate, sabotage to the definition of Sahabi. You have, and an example of that is Muhammad bin Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, who is the son of Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, who at the time of the passing of Rasulullah was only 3 months old. But he is still Sahabi. Right? So, and you have various other companions that are Sahabi who saw Rasulullah and Rasulullah passed when they were still young. But they're still Sahabi. Okay? The other aspect of Sahabi also is that they're not all the same, and we've said this before, I'm going to keep saying this, they're not all the same. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizes this in the Quran. As-sabiqun al-awwaluna min al-muhajirin wal-ansar. So he gives preference to those who were the first, whether they are muhajir or ansar, to accept Islam. So their position is way different than those who accepted Islam later, and especially those who accepted Islam after Fatih Makkah. Every Sahabi of Rasulullah will enter Jannah, irrespective of what category they fall into. So long as they died on Iman. And again, the other aspect of this is there is no action that can make someone stop being a Sahabi other than if they leave Islam. Because, they didn't gain the companionship by making a lot of salat or giving a lot of zakat or, fighting here or fighting there. They gained that simply by having Iman and seeing Rasulullah. The only way to lose that position is if you lose Iman. That's another point, because people will start talking about, well, he did this and he did that. Well, he's still Sahabi. And this is going to, because inshallah today we'll talk about Siffin. And so this is going to be really important to understand this now. There are several other aspects of this which I'm going to come back to as we're talking about things and they pop into my head and I say, yeah, okay, we need to go back and reiterate another point. The Sahabi, as we know, the companions of Rasulullah are not masum. So they're not innocent. They made mistakes. They committed sins. But again, those sins did not take them out of being the companion of Rasulullah. So they still warrant our respect and honor them, and we don't think any less of them. But when we're comparing companions, they're not all the same. And we need to be clear about that as well. Because it's interesting that when I talk about Muawiyah radiallahu anhu and some of the things that he did, then people will start saying, oh, he's a Sahabi. Well, I know he's Sahabi, but he did these things. It doesn't make him not Sahabi. All right? No. So, but then they will turn around and talk about the household and and create things that they didn't do. And then it's not an issue, which shows you their hypocrisy. Because the Sahabi are not masum, they are mahfuz, they are protected, but they're not innocent. The prophets are innocent. They don't sin. You know? The household, and when we're talking about the household, I'm specifically talking here, when I say household, I'm specifically talking about Ali, Fatima, Hassan, and Hussein, alayhimus salam. Okay? I'm not including anybody else. And I know there are different definitions because somebody listening to this on the thing will say, what about this and what about that? Yeah, I know there are different definitions as far as household and different categories. When I'm talking about it at this moment, this is what I'm talking about. Okay. They are also not masoom like the companion, like the prophets are masoom. Okay. They are capable of committing a sin, but they did not. And that's a distinction there. So if somebody creates a mistake for them, that's their own problem. And there are plenty of those folks around these days. Again, that just simply shows you their hypocrisy. And the mistakes that the companions made are lessons for us. We still follow them. They are still stars for us. But by those mistakes, we learn, okay, how do I correct myself? That's how I follow them. All right. And we've gone over those examples before about the companion, the female companion who committed zina, and about how she repented. Again, they're not masoom. They made mistakes, but they made tawbah for their mistakes. And so, in the end, we will talk about the tawbah of Ma'awiyah radiallahu anhu. But before we start talking about him in general, we started talking about him last week. When we talked about the beginning of the Khilafah, and we talked about the Battle of the Camel, and what led up to that. But again, we can't, people start accusing companions of disbelief and of other things, which is, total nonsense. Yes, there were at that time hypocrites, but that category does not apply to Ma'awiyah radiallahu anhu. And we'll show that as well. So anyone who says that, oh, he left Islam or anything like that, he himself doesn't know what he's talking about. The other thing to understand before we start talking about Siffin is, when we look at the Quran, you have verses of ahkam, which means verses of the commands, the do's and the don'ts, which is less than 10% of the verses of the Quran, number-wise. And you have other verses of the Quran as well that deal with all the other aspects, about reasoning, about the knowledge of the unseen, the knowledge of the hereafter, the knowledge of the Day of Judgment, the knowledge of the favors of Allah, the knowledge of the days of Allah, so when we're dealing with ahkam, if you look at the verses of ahkam, not only were the verses revealed, but also the practical application of these verses was shown during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, there is one verse that could not be applied during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I'm not going to say exactly why it couldn't be applied then at this moment. We'll probably come back to that later on, inshallah, at the end. But it's verse number 9 of surah number 49, Surah Hujurat, also known as Surah Adab. And the verse starts off with أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإن طائفتان من المؤمنين اقتتلوا. If two parties among the mu'mins, among the believers, fall into a fight, and the verse continues on, make ye peace between them. But if one of them transgresses beyond bounds against the other, then fight ye all against the one that transgresses until it complies with the command of Allah. But if it complies, then make peace between them, and justice, and be fair. For Allah loves those who are fair and just. Okay. So if you look at this verse, you have two parties of believers, mu'mineen, who fall into a dispute, and a decision is made, but one of them does not comply. And then the command is, all of you then fight against the one that does not comply and force them into compliance. And once they comply, then, be fair and just with them. For Allah loves those that are fair and just. At no time did that one party that did not comply leave Islam. All right? So according to this verse, you have two parties of believers falling into dispute. You have, a decision being made. One of them doesn't comply. They are still believers. All right? It simply says you force them into compliance. All right? So remember this verse number 9 of Surah Hujurat. And I'm going to mention this verse at the end again today, inshallah, and then probably even next week. Because it's an important verse to understand, and also to understand why this verse could not be applied during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And for those who've been coming regularly and listening, we've already talked about this in the past. But we'll, like I said, we'll go over this, especially since we're talking about this topic. So last week, as we mentioned, Battle of the Camel. So, and in this, many of the companions of Rasulullah are martyred, which included companions like Zubair and Talha radiallahu anhuma, who are Ashar Mubashara. Yeah. Aisha radiallahu anha, who was on the, was also in this battle. At the end, Ali radiallahu anhu sends her back to Medina Munawwara, escorted by her younger brother, Muhammad ibn Abu Bakr, and one of the other companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they take her back to Medina Munawwara, and she doesn't get involved with the politics anymore. Everybody's not an expert on everything. For Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu anha, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, take in one narration half your religion from her, another narration 2/3 of your religion from her. That means there's a portion that's left out. He didn't say take all your religion from her. So that's also an important point to note. Not everything was her expertise. And she realized that at the end of the Battle of the Camel. And that's why she didn't get involved in these issues directly anymore. She did get involved a little bit later on, but those were blatant violations, which she attempted to correct. But when people are of the mindset that they don't care what you do, they're going to do what they're going to do, you can't correct those people. And we'll talk about that later as well, inshallah. So that's going to be important to note. So after this, Ali radhiyallahu goes back to Kufa with his troops. They regroup, and as we mentioned before, he had already sent the letter to Muawiyah radhiyallahu to accept him as the Khalifa, and Muawiyah radhiyallahu had refused. So Ali radhiyallahu sets out with his troops, and I'm not going into a lot of details. I'm hitting the points that we need to know firmly in order to be able to understand the situation, in general, and also be able to understand how that applies to us today. Sometimes people get lost in the details and they forget. It's like what we say down here: you can't see the forest for the trees. You're looking at, you're so close to the forest that you see these trees, but you can't see the forest. And that's what happens with a lot of folks, and especially when we're talking about this. So when he sets out from there, Muawiyah along with his army sets out as well. Ali follows the path of the Euphrates, and they eventually come to a place that's known as Sifin, modern day Raqqa, which is like mid-Syria.
Sifin, I thought it's a mountain in Kurdistan.
No, this is different. This was an area, this is in modern day Sham.
I thought it was one over there where
It might be in Kurdistan, part of Sham.
maybe,
Yeah, but
because I heard about it a lot.
yeah.
Like,
So it's
you know,
right.
People around, and I heard about it a lot.
Yeah, so it's right next to the Euphrates. So it's basically mid-Syria right now. If you follow the Euphrates, because Euphrates starts in Turkey, and it comes through Syria, and then into Iraq. So if you look at the Euphrates in Syria, basically about midway along its path is where this was. Ali Radion's army is roughly about 100,000 men. Muawiyah Radion's army is roughly about 130,000 men. You know, if you remember when we talked about Khandaq, where 10,000 men came against the Muslims in Medina Munawwara, that was an unheard of number in Arabia. Most Bedouin Arabs couldn't count more than 1,000. When you say 10,000, you know, army of 10,000, that was a massive collection at that time because the Arabs couldn't get together on anything, except when it came to fighting against the Rasulullah at that time. However, when we start looking at after that, during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr and stuff, then you start seeing these armies grow exponentially. Massive armies, like even in the Battle of the Camel, in the Battle of Yamama, Musaylima's army was like 40,000 men. Abu Bakr, the Muslims' army was 13,000 men. So here, as I said, Ali Radha's army roughly 100,000, the opposing army roughly 130,000. When they arrived at Safin, Muawiyah Radha's army had arrived earlier. They took control of the water. If you remember in Badr, Rasulullah took control of the water. And we'll come back to this point. Muawiyah Radha takes control, or his army takes control of the water. And when Ali Radha's army arrives, they refuse to give them any water. So Ali Radha's men force the issue and beat them back and eventually take control of the water. Ali Radha, like Rasulullah, allows the opposing side to take the water. So Ali Radha allows Muawiyah Radha's army, just like Rasulullah had in Badr, allowed Quraysh to take the water, he allows them to take the water. The armies are there for a little over 3 months. Ali Radha keeps trying to negotiate, to come to some type of agreement based on the Quran and the Sunnah. And he keeps saying this, let's decide this according to the Quran and the Sunnah. And he keeps getting rejected from the other side. And the other side keeps reiterating that the only way that they will, have any negotiations is that they want the blood of Uthman. They want the blood for Uthman. And Ali Azam keeps explaining to them, look, how can we do that until we get this situation clarified and we have peace within the Ummah, then we can pursue the attackers. So you have to understand, this went on for 3 months. 3 months plus. Ali Radha does not want to fight. He wants some type of solution to this without fighting. The other side didn't give him any leeway. They weren't willing to come to any terms. So those are important points to understand. The other points to understand is that the army of Ali, all of the companions of Badr who were still alive, who fought in this battle of Safin, all of them were in the army of Ali, radiallahu anhu. The vast majority of companions who fought in this battle were in the army of Ali. You had a few companions who were in the army of Muawiyah. And if you look at how they ended up in that army, there were other underlying issues. And you had, most of those who were there were companions who did not, or rather, basically all of them that were there were not of the original Sabiqun al-Awwalun. Okay? And when we talked about Umar, we talked about how he would take shura, how he would take counsel. And everything always ended up with, what did the Sabiqun al-Awwalun say? What did those who were first say? And that was the decision that would be made and accepted. All right. You had other companions who tried to take a neutral stance in this, which included the son of Umar, Abdullah ibn Umar. He, however, would always chastise himself for taking that stance later on, which is related to the verse that we talked about, verse number 9 of Surah Hujurat. And so if I forget to remember, reiterate why he would do that, remind me. So again, as I said, for 3 months, Ali was trying to negotiate. They are refusing to negotiate. And this went back, on for until, at that time, what was the end of what would now be July. So it was hot, it was summer, and eventually on a Wednesday the fighting starts. So battle starts on Wednesday between the two sides. Muawiyah's army initially pushes the right flank of Ali's army back on the first day. So on the first day it seemed like his army had the upper hand. Important point to understand here again, that I mentioned last week, is that the sons of Ali, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein Islam, played crucial roles within his army. And the reason I keep reiterating that point is because of things that some people said later on, especially after Imam Hassan al-Islam hands over the rule. They'll make it seem like, well, I won't even say it right. We'll go over that when we get to that point, because that opens up another door. But that's going to be important to understand. So just remember, they played a crucial role and are very active in the fighting. They did not back down from the fighting, and they pushed forward whenever they could. It's not like, we don't want to fight. That was not their attitudes once the fighting began. None of them, including Ali, didn't want to fight until they absolutely had to. So if they say, well, they didn't want to fight, well, Ali didn't want to fight either. He's looking at the whole picture of the ummah, and he is the Khilafah of Rashida is in his hand. People forget that he is the rightful Khalifa. Anyone who opposes him is wrong. Period. Because they want to use that hadith later on, but they forget to use the hadith of Rasulullah applying to whoever opposes the rightful Khalifa. And at this point, when it comes to Ali, they forget that hadith. And these are things I'm going to reiterate later on and kind of give a little more details to these narrations, inshallah. Another person that's very important to understand that is in the army of Ali is Ammar bin Yasir, radiallahu anhu. And the reason it is so important is because you have the hadith, which is in Sahih Bukhari, in Sahih Muslim, and in various other books of the hadith, where when they had dug the trench for the foundation of the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all of the companions were bringing one stone, heavy stones. Ammar was bringing 2 heavy stones by himself. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is very pleased when he sees this, but then he also, he says, woe, that you will be killed by a rebellious group. Okay? Fidatul Baghriya, this rebellious group will kill you. And another narration, he also said that whoever kills him and takes his spoils, because you'd kill somebody, you'd take their armor or whatever, he says whoever does that will be in the fire. So, as I said, the first day, another person that also is fighting in the army of Ali is Uwais Qarni. For those who don't know, he is Tabi, he's not Sahabi. He was Muslim during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He wanted to come and meet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but his mother was very old and ill, and he kept looking after her. He came once to meet him, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not in Medina at that time, and he had to go back. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made him the inheritor of his cloak after him. So this cloak was given to him by Umar and Ali at the command of Rasulullah. So he's not just anybody. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that because of him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive from my ummah as many people as the hairs of the goats of Banu Kalb. This was a tribe that had many, many goats. And he says, because of him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive this many of my ummah. So again, he's not just anybody. He's also fighting in this battle alongside with Ali. The second day of the battle is when everything shifts. So now Ali is now, his army is pushing harder and harder. And during the course of the battle, and I'm not sure whether it was second or the third day, is when Ammar is martyred. And so when this is mentioned to Muawiyah, he doesn't deny that Rasulullah said what he said about Ammar. His explanation for it is, that wasn't us, that was just a small group within our army. They're the rebellious ones. And there are other things that were also said that I'm not going to get into the details of now. But that's how he justified it. So you had Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday. So the fourth day of the battle is when, Ali's army is overwhelming. Actually, by the third day, by the Friday, by the end of that day, Muawiyah and his army, they basically had lost hope. It was kind of like, okay, we're going to lose. And this is when Amr bin al-As, who is also a companion of Rasulullah, who is one of the advisors to Muawiyah, and one of his generals. And it's important to note here, during the battle, Ali is with his troops fighting physically, in front of his troops fighting, leading them. Muawiyah was in the back, in the pavilion, giving instructions from behind. Okay. So Amr says to Muawiyah, tomorrow we will do something that will break his army apart. And so what they did was that they took pieces of the Mus'haf, of the Quran, and they placed them on top of their spears the next day as they marched out, and say that we accept the decision according to the Quran, according to this. Ali had been saying this for 3 months, and they didn't listen to him. And now suddenly they say, oh, we'll accept the decision based on the Quran. So Ali Radhi's army is moving forward, his main generals are moving forward, and all the men, when they see this, they stop. Oh, no. We want to accept the decision of the Quran. So, and they lay down their weapons. Ali Radhi is telling them, look, this is a trick of war, move forward, keep fighting. And because if they had fought that day, it would have ended the war. Ali Radhi would have established his position, and it would have ended everything. But most of his army now lay down their weapons. You have a few generals that are saying, no, let's keep fighting, but then because of the situation, Ali Radhi has to call them back as well. When this happens, so then they say, oh, we'll decide. So finally, they have to back off. Ali Radhi has to call his army back. The army stops, and they say that we will agree to arbitration based on the Quran and the Sunnah. And what was agreed at that point was that each side would pick a representative, they would meet, and come to a decision as to what to do. Ali Radhi has specified before that any decision that is not based on the Quran and the Sunnah, he will not accept. He had already said this right at the beginning. And the whole process was not in line with the Quran and Sunnah, because Ali Radhi again has already been chosen by the Shura as the Khalifa. Just like with Uthman, with all of the rebellion coming in, Uthman was the Khalifa. You can't take away someone's Khilafah, unless you show, grievous violations of that position. And again, it's not the people that can do this, the Shura will do this. The people can bring complaints, but they cannot remove or reestablish somebody. So the only way for someone to exit from being the Khalifa is he himself leaves, for which there is no real precedence. People talk about Imam Hassan al-Islam, but the Khilafah was already over because 30 years was up. And we'll get into that when we talk about that specifically. So he didn't hand over the Khilafah, he simply handed over the rule. And there's a huge difference there. So what this does now is that, so they decided, okay, because Muawiyah already controlled Sham. The thing is that within his army, he had like 130,000, as we mentioned. Roughly about 45,000 of those were killed in the battle. And on Ali Radhi's side, roughly about 25,000 of his men were killed in the battle. So he had huge loss of life. Unprecedented from previous battles in Arabia. And unprecedented within the Muslims. Which put a lot of fear in a lot of people's hearts. After this was over, they didn't want to go back over the same thing again. And this would lead to certain things that would happen later on. This sense, or this feeling. Okay. So the arbitration, the other point that I keep reiterating, and I need to keep reiterate this now, is things did not move like they move today. Like even, if you look at today, the world today, the world is moving at a much faster rate than it even was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. You look at technology now, the way that things happen. Okay. Well, now, think about 1400 years ago. So, any decision process took time, and it could take months. So, the decision was made at this point that, Muawiyah would stay in Sham. People of Sham were loyal to him. And Ali would go back to Kufa, and they divided, the rule as to who rules over what piece of the empire, and that these two arbitrators from each side would meet at a neutral location. Ali, when he goes back to Kufa, within his realm is also Hijaz. So Hijaz, Fidq, and this is another point to understand, is if Fidq is in his control, then why didn't he give it back to Ahlul Bayt if there was an issue with it before? If there was something like that before, like some people bring up, he could have, done that very easily at this point. Sham, which at this time includes what is modern-day Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, all of that is in the control of Muawiyah. Iraq, Hijaz, Misr are in the control of Ali. Ali wanted to appoint Ibn Abbas as his arbitrator. However, you have that fifth column. So he had men within Ali's army, and those who had also laid down their weapons, who, it's funny because these same people who laid down their weapons are now complaining to Ali, why did you accept arbitration? To the extent that some of them left his army. Oh, what are you doing? We don't agree with this. Well, you're the one, and he's telling these, you're the ones who put down the weapons, and forced us into this situation. So these same people are saying, no, why'd you accept arbitration? We're not going along with this. So some of them left. Then you have others, because again, he wanted to appoint Ibn Abbas. They said, no, let's appoint Abu Musa al-Ashari radiyallahu anhu. Abu Musa radiyallahu anhu is a very close companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was very pious, but not very politically astute. And again, that's not a criticism of him. Not everybody has to be politically astute. That was not his field. He specialized in other things of the religion. So they insisted, the people on Ali's side as well as the other side insisted, because when Ali said, I want to name Ibn Abbas, even the other side said, no, we don't want you naming him. And people within his own group are saying, no, we don't want you naming him. We want Abu Musa, who had at one point been the governor of Kufa. So we want you to name him. So he reluctantly agrees. One point here, and several points that we have to keep reminding ourselves and remembering is, Ali knows. He is the door to the city of knowledge. He knows, but he also knows what is to come. But he bows himself because he knows what the will of Allah is. So he bows himself to that will. So he says, fine, Abu Musa. On the other side, they name Amr bin al-As. Amr bin al-As, from a political standpoint, is very astute. He had been an ambassador to Persia. an ambassador to Qisra. He had been an ambassador to Abyssinia. He was very good friends with Najashi. In fact, if you remember, before Najashi became Muslim, he was the one who Quraysh sent to try to go and bring back the Muslims who had emigrated to Abyssinia. So he's named as the representative from the side of Muawiyah. So you have two meetings that take place. One, not long after, the decision for arbitration is made. And here, when I say not long after, it means, like a few months afterwards. We're not talking not long after, like 2 minutes later. Again, you have to keep that framework in mind. Things didn't move very quickly. So, at the first meeting in Dawmat al-Jundal, which is, I guess, northern Arabia, in the area of Tabuk, in that general area, they meet, and in this meeting, what happens is that, as I said, Amr is politically very astute. Abu Musa is not. Abu Musa's whole goal is he wants peace. And in the first meeting, they kind of, one side is feeling the other side out. And in that feeling out of the other side, they realize that the other side is willing for peace to even, to find another Khalifa. Which again goes against what Ali RA had already said, that he will not accept any decision that is not in line with the Quran and the Sunnah. In the meantime, what's going on in Kufa is that, initially, before Ali RA returned to Kufa, as I said, there were people that broke off, well, how did you accept arbitration? And when he tells them that, well, you're the one who forced me, some of them says, well, we repented from that position now. We know we were wrong, so we repented. Okay, so you must also repent. So Ali RA says, look, I repent, from every wrong action that I've done. Every wrong action I've committed, I repent from that. All right, and then he also says to them, he says, and I will not accept any decision that is not in line with the Quran and the Sunnah, which was his position from the very beginning. So when they arrive back in Kufa, these same people now are running around and telling everybody that, Ali RA is not going to accept the decision of the arbitration, which is not what he said. Okay, but that's, they heard what they wanted to hear. So they're undermining his position, even though some of them may be thinking that, that they're not, but they're undermining his position. He didn't say, I'm not going to accept the decision of the arbitration. He said, I will not accept any decision that is not in line with the Quran and the Sunnah. Period. Yeah. So you have all of this going on. So then when he tries to correct them, they say, And most of these guys are what was known back then as the Qura. The Qura at that time was like Maulana today, or Sheikh. But at that time, when you said Qura, you specifically talked about someone who was generally Hafiz of Quran and a scholar of the time. They knew the language in and out. They knew the Quran, as far as, the wording, backwards and forwards. They could tell you all these rules about recitation, all the rules of the meaning, of the grammar, and all of this stuff. So these are the guys who have all of this superficial knowledge, but in reality they don't have any knowledge because they don't acknowledge the door that is to that city of knowledge, who is Ali. radiallahu anhu. So many of them eventually leave and they go to a place called Nahwan, which will be important to remember later on. Three main battles during the Khilafah of Ali RA that we in general should know, and that's why I'm talking about this now, and I've talked about this before as well. So for some people this is a reminder, and for others it might be something new. Jamal, which we spoke about last week, Safin, which we're talking about now, and Nahwan, which we may be able to start into next week, depending on how far we get. Okay. I'm gonna sort of stop here. There's some points I want to reiterate, and I will reiterate those and then kind of open up for questions. Because as I said, this is not a topic that we take lightly, and it's not a topic that anybody should simply be picking up a book on their own and reading. It needs to be done under the guidance of somebody who understands or has a understanding of the position of the companions of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Because this is where you get people who start, cursing the companions and doing all this other stuff, sort of nonsense, and also understanding, the position of Ahlul Bayt. Because this is also where you get people, kind of undermining their positions. Saying, oh, Ali should have done this or Ali should have done that. Which is funny because, if somebody says that about the opposite other side, then they get all up in arms, but then they say it about Ali, and it's like, they don't have an issue with that. So, again, hypocrisy, double standard. But as I said, the companions of Rasulullah Sallallahu are the companions of Rasulullah Sallallahu. None of them will be touched by the fire, and they are not ma'soom, but they are mahfuz. And so we don't have any bad thoughts about any of them. So that needs to be very, very clear. And as I said, companion of Rasulullah is the one who saw him with Iman and dies on that Iman, irregardless of what their age was when they saw him. So long as they had Iman when they saw him, and they died on that same Iman that they saw him with, they are the companions of Rasulullah. No action other than the action of leaving Islam can remove them from that position. And, this gets into where, and we spoke about this a few weeks ago, where Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, and people only quote part of it, they don't give you the whole context of it, is where he said that, he said, do not curse my companions. Because even if you spend the whole mountain of Uhud, of gold, in the way of Allah, you cannot equal one mud of wheat or barley that they spent in the way of Allah. One mud is like it's like half a kilo, so it's a little more than a pound. So even if you spend trillions of times more than them, it still doesn't equal them. But who did he say this to? He didn't say this to some non-companion. And this is the important point to understand here as well. He said this to Khalid bin Walid because he had said some words to Abdul Rahman bin Auf. Khalid bin Walid became Muslim a year before Fatih Makkah. Abdul Rahman bin Auf is one of the very early Muslims who became Muslim during the time of secret propagation. He is one of the Ashara Mubashara. So he's saying this to Khalid in reference to Abdul Rahman. Again, levels are not the same. So even within the companions. So if this is what he's saying to Khalid, then who are we? Okay? So that's an important point. So I'm going to come back to that verse. Yeah. Get too much stuff to keep on hand, and everything falls. So again, verse number 9 of Surah Hujurat, Surah number 49. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإن طائفتان من المؤمنين اقتتلوا فأصلحوا بينهما. If two parties among the believers, among the mu'min, and the word here is mu'min, it's not Muslim, it's mu'min, fall into dispute or fight, make ye peace between them. But if one of them, in the rest of the verse, but if one of them transgresses beyond bounds against the other, then fight ye all together against the one that transgresses until it complies with the command of Allah. But if it complies, then make peace between them and justice and be fair. For Allah loves those who are fair or just. Inna Allah yuhibbul muqsitin. Okay. So as I said, there is no way that this verse could be applied during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because if you look at the verse, you have two parties of believers who fall into dispute. One of them, a decision is made. One of them rejects the decision and transgresses. And the command is for everybody else to fight against them until they comply with the decision. Okay. At no time did either one of these parties fall out of Islam. They're still parties of believers. So now the question is, why could this verse not be applied during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? We've talked about this before, so some of you know. Who remembers?
It's something on the lines of, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the truth,
Yeah, so during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if there was any dispute, who would be the decision maker? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If somebody did not accept his decision, are they still believers? No. And this verse number 65 of Surah Nisa, Surah number 4, verse 65, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فلا وربك لا يؤمنون حتى يحكموك فيما شجر بينهم ثم لا يجدوا في أنفسهم حرجا مما قضيت ويسلموا تسليما. And just, I don't know, the beginning of this verse always is just the beauty of it, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by himself. Okay? But he's swearing by himself as the Lord of Rasulullah, as the Lord, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he doesn't simply say that I swear by your Lord. He says, I swear by no one other than your Lord. That's really what it says. Fala, denial, wa rabbika. But no, by no one other than your Lord, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, such a strong swearing. لا يؤمنون حتى يحكموك فيما شجر بينهم. That none of them can be believers. And here, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't simply saying none of them can be believers. He is swearing by himself as the Lord of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that none of them can be believers until they make thee judge in all disputes between them. And not only make him a judge, and find in their souls no resistance against thy decision. Okay. So that whatever he decides, there's no hesitation in it. Simply acceptance, that's it. Okay. And then he doesn't stop there. He says, but accept them with the fullest conviction. فَقَدَيْتَ وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. So that not only that they don't have any hesitation in whatever he sallallahu alaihi wasallam decides, but the true believers loves whatever he decides for them. So during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, any decision that would be made, if there was a dispute, who would make the decision? He would make the decision. That's who they would come to. If someone didn't like the decision, he is no longer a believer. So this is why the verse in Surah Hujurat could not be applied during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But every verse has to have an example. And so Allah chose, and who better to be the example other than Ali? So there had to be an issue with him, because he is the tongue of Rasulullah. So he is the spiritual representative of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is what, if you remember, when the verses were revealed, when Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu was sent for Hajj, to be the Amir of the Hajj, and the verses were revealed after he leaves, about basically telling the non-believers that they had 4 months to either accept Islam or get out of Makkah, get out of the Haram. Who was commanded to recite those verses? The rest of the khutbah was given by Abu Bakr, yet the verses are recited by Ali radiallahu anhu. And this is also why Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayhi, he says that he took all of the rulings that deal with that verse of Surah Hujurat from the dispute between Ali and Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. If you look at the background to this verse in Surah Nisa, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says none of them believes, what is the background to that? So the background to the verse is, why the verse was revealed, is that there was a dispute. We've talked about this before. Again, pretty much everything we're talking about, we've talked about before at some point. There was a dispute between a Muslim in Medina and his neighbor who was Jew. And the dispute was that the Muslim, they had adjacent properties, right? The water, was, of course, water in the desert is scarce. Even in an oasis, it's not unlimited. So you had certain gardens within Medina that had water, and this was a big deal. And you had other gardens that did not, so they would get water from other places. So the water that was there would flow across the property of the Muslim onto the property of the Jewish man. So what the Muslim did was that he blocked that water, keeping it from flowing onto the property of the Jewish man. And he would use it only in his own garden. So, they exchanged words. They tried to come to a solution. The Muslim guy's not here having anything. So finally, the Jewish man says, well, let's go to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and let him decide. And the Jewish guy said, no, let's go to Ka'b. I forget what the other guys, Ka'b, who was the one of the emirs of one of the Jewish tribes. He said, no, let's go to him. And the Jewish man says, what's your issue with going to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He's your prophet. And he insisted, no, let's go to Muhammad. He didn't want to go to the other guy who's Jewish, even though he's Jewish, because he knew the other guy was crooked. So the Jewish man insists that no, we're going to him. So finally the guy had to give in, and so they went. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam hears them both out. and decides in favor of the Jewish man. And he tells the Muslim, he says, emphasizes to him, do not block the water from coming onto his property. Otherwise there will be consequences. So they leave. Of course, the Jewish man is all happy. The so-called Muslim is, So when they come out, they're on their way home. Of course, they're neighbors. And the Muslim says, let's go to Umar. He wanted a second opinion. He wasn't satisfied that one guy is telling him that your heart is messed up. Or rather, he wasn't satisfied that Rasulullah is telling him that your heart is messed up. He wanted a second opinion. He said, let's go to Umar. And of course, Umar is famous for being harsh on the non-believers. So the Jewish man says, what are you talking about? Your prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just made the decision. And he says, no, let's go to... And he insists. So finally the Jewish man says, okay, let's go. And they go. So they set out, and as they're headed to the home, they meet Umar along the way. And the Muslim starts telling him the whole story about, we've got this property, and the water, and all the excuses that they come up with, that I barely have enough for my garden and all this other stuff, and whatever excuse he wanted to come up with. He's giving all the whole story to Umar. And Umar was listening to him, calmly. And then at the end of his spiel, the Jewish man simply says, look, he says, we are just coming from Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who decided in my favor. We already went through this with him, and he decided in my favor. And so Umar looks at the Muslim and says, is what he's saying true? Is this true? He says, yes. Couldn't deny it. So he says, yes. So he says, fine. He says, wait here. I'm going to go in my house. I'll come back and I'll give my decision. Goes into his house, pulls his sword, comes outside, chops off the head of the Muslim. And he says, this is my decision for the ones who don't accept his decision. And so now there's an uproar in Medina. Umar killed a Muslim. Umar killed a Muslim. Everybody's saying Umar killed a Muslim. And the guy's family is demanding revenge. Rasulullah is upset. But he's not, people, they're hypocrites that use this, and they say, oh, see, he didn't know. Rasulullah didn't know, otherwise why would he be upset? Just the stupidity of their thought process. He's upset because people are accusing his Umar of having killed a Muslim. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals this verse. Swearing by Rasulullah, but swearing by the Lord of Rasulullah, by himself, as the Lord of Rasulullah. فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ. That none of them is a believer unless they accept you as the judge in all of their affairs, and have no hesitation in accepting it, and again, sallimu taslima, that they accept it with love and wholeheartedly accept it. Not like, I gotta do this. It doesn't work. Any attitude like that, there's no iman. And so that's why that verse of Surah Hujurat could not be applied during the time of Rasulullah. Very simple, not difficult to understand. But again, there had to be a practical example for the rest of the ummah. And so this is why this takes place now. And one of those in this, because who else is going to be that example other than Ali radiallahu anhu? So it had to be an issue between him and someone else. But again, in that verse, those two parties are parties of believers, and each one remains a believer. going to sort of stop here. I'm just going to add a couple of words, because every time I say I'm going to sort of stop, I kind of add a few things. Related to today, to what's going on. When you look at the Muslim Ummah, and I like the statement. It's a sad statement, but it's a true statement. When we look at ourselves, of the Palestinian who was quoted on Turkish media as saying to the rest of the Muslim countries that don't make Salatul Janazah for us, don't pray funeral prayers for us. We are alive, you are the ones that are dead. And this is where there are certain differences within the Ummah that are legitimate. You have many differences that are not legitimate. Unfortunately, you have people that even take the legitimate differences and try to create something that's not there, to create more barriers between each other. It's specifically because of these barriers that we are in the condition that we are in. Barriers between those that have legitimate differences, but also the barrier of not being able to see those whose differences are illegitimate. Because when you have groups, because we will talk about them, the Khawarij, we'll start talking about them next week, inshallah. So when you have those groups within those that claim to be believers, who are exactly as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam described them, and how can they be any different? That they do takfir and they kill the believers. And they declare everybody as kafir who doesn't agree with what they say, and they kill the believers. The only way out of that situation is to basically excise the cancer. Because that's exactly what they are within the Ummah. And so this is something that, inshallah, as I said, I didn't have time to get into it today. There are other aspects of the arbitration of Safin that we'll get into next week, inshallah, and kind of sort of try to wrap that up as a general thing. Of course, it takes time to reiterate various points that we keep forgetting, and we need to keep in mind and focus when we're talking about this, and that's why I keep reiterating. Because usually what's going to happen is that somebody will hear 10 minutes of what I said, and then say, see, he said that. Or not even 10 minutes, listen to a minute of what I said, or a few seconds, and so, see, he said that. And when it's not what I said. And of course, the whole internet is full of that these days. Even to the extent, like here, a certain person that stopped coming to Friday here because he said that my dad was disrespectful to Allah. So he asked him, well, how was he? So my father asked me, how was I disrespectful to Allah? Oh, you said that saying La ilaha illallah doesn't mean anything. No, that's not what he said. He said that it doesn't matter how many times you say La ilaha illallah, if you don't say Muhammadur Rasulullah, then it doesn't mean anything. No. See, so again, people are people and they want to do what they want to do. And this is why we're in the condition we're in. And why, our brothers and sisters in Palestine are suffering because of what we're doing, or lack of what we're doing. Any questions about sort of what we talked about today?
I have 2 questions.
Okay, inshallah.
The first one, the fight between Imam Ali on the other side, for those people who got killed, are still Ahl Jannah?
Yeah, so the first question...
On both sides?
Yeah, let me cover that. The first question is that, the fight between Ali RA and the opposing sides. And here I'm specifically talking about Jamal and Safin.
Mm-hmm.
Jamal specifically, yeah, because Ali radiallahu led the Salatul Janazah, not only for the people that were martyred on his side, but also for the people that were martyred on the other side. Okay. And so, yeah, those are still Ahl Jannah. Okay. Any of the companions, as I said, even if they were opposing on the opposing side, they're still Ahl Jannah. Okay. There are exceptions in Safin. Nahwan is complete exception. They are not Ahl Jannah. And we haven't talked about that one yet. That's the one we'll talk about next week, inshallah. Those are people who have exited Islam. But in Safin, as I mentioned, Ammar bin Yasir was martyred in this battle. I didn't say the whole narration. The rest of the narration is that he said, Rasulullah said that that you will be killed by a rebellious group. Okay, you will be inviting them to Jannah, or Ammar will be inviting them to Jannah, and they will be inviting him to the fire. And in one narration, actually, it says the more common narration, it says that they will be inviting him to the fire, and he will be inviting them to Allah. Okay. So you have, and he said also that whoever kills him and takes his spoils, it will be in the fire. Okay. So that becomes an exception. So you have amongst them, but you also have to understand, because amongst these armies you had hypocrites who were also in there. So those, I can't say 100% that everybody who died in these, yes, but in general, and it's and as far as the companions, that's a no-brainer. Okay, that's period. But as far as in general, even the other people, because Ali also said that they are our brothers as far as Safin, but they have been misled against us. The propaganda was so strong. So he said they are brothers, but they have been misled against us. So he also made Salatul Janazah for those who died in Safin as well, even from the opposing side. His attitude toward the people in Nahwan, which again we will talk about next week, inshallah, will be very, very different. And that's very important to understand, because once we start talking about Nahwan, you will see how we tie that into all of this stuff that's going on within the Ummah, and also stuff that's going on, because these are also the people that will have no hesitation in aligning themselves with those who openly oppose Islam, which is what we see now. Okay? So what's the other question?
Yeah, the other question, when you said believer, that's been only Muslim, or it could be any other religion?
Now, when we're talking about believer now, we're talking about the one who says La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, not just with the tongue, but with the heart. And so there is no way to believe except through Rasulullah. Just like for those who were during the time of Isa alayhi salam, those from Bani Israel who rejected him rejected all faith. Those who accepted him accepted Iman. Okay? But for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is universal. He is sent to all of creation. Okay? Any other questions?
Is there any difference between Muslim and Mu'min?
So the difference between Muslim and Mu'min. So you have sort of like three categories. You have Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. Muslim is simply one who says the kalma. He accepts the kalma, but it really hasn't sunk into the heart. The mu'min is the believer whose tongue and heart are in line. So there is that distinction. And just like like when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sent Mu'adh bin Jabal radhiyallahu to Yemen, and Mu'adh radhiyallahu asked him, he said, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how should I invite the people? So he said, first invite them to Islam. To the kalma la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. And then start bringing them to salat and to all these other things. And so as they do those things, and as they become, as you know, that love becomes more ingrained into them, then you know that becomes so you know, unfortunately these days somebody becomes Muslim and everybody jumps on top of the, oh, you got to do this and you got to do that, and oh, don't forget about this, and you know, and you just overwhelm the guy. And that's not the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, it has to be a process, even for those who have been Muslim for you know, since they were born, for decades. You know, it's still a process. Anyone who tells you that he's got it all is lying. He doesn't have anything. Yeah. So, ihsan is the ultimate, you know, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that, you know, ihsan is to worship Allah as though you see Him. And if you can't do that, then at least know that He sees you. You know, which is definitely not us, because of course, you know, we're in salat and our mind is everywhere. Except where it should be. Anything else?
Always Qarni came to Medina to meet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he did not met. But later on, did he met?
No. Yeah, Uwais Qarni never met Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So his story, you know, Uwais is from Yemen. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would tell the companions that I smell the fragrance of Jannah coming from Yemen. Or he would say, I smell the fragrance of Ar-Rahman coming from Jannah. So Uwais and some of his other relatives were very, 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 I mean, you can't even put enough berries on their pious, you know. And love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam beyond, you know, what most of us could even imagine. So he had an elderly mother who, you know, was, I mean, there was no one else to take care of her except for him. So the one time he was able to come to Medina, he was able to arrange somebody else to take care of his mother for a short time. By the time he got to Medina Munawwara, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was out on some expedition. He waited a short time, couldn't wait any longer because, you know, the arrangements he had made were not indefinite, and so he had to get back. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions him as he's sitting amongst the companions. And this conversation is going on, and he takes off his cloak and he hands it to Umar. And Umar is all happy, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, it's not for you. And then he starts telling them about Uwais, and he says to them, he says that, you know, and they asked, will we meet him? He says these two will meet him, Umar and Ali. And he says that give him my cloak and tell him to pray for my ummah. And he also tells them at that time that because of his dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive, as I said, you know, this tribe that was known for the number of goats, many goats that it had as many hairs on their goats from this ummah. And so during the Khilafah of Umar, they met him the first time. Of course, later he joined the army of Ali. Of course, by this time his mother has passed. So they met him, and they go and they're looking for him because there's a group that's come and they know, okay, he's in this group. So they ask the people and they say he's over there. So they go to him. And they asked him, they said, what's your name? He says, Abdullah. Everyone is Abdullah. He doesn't know, what's your real name? You know? So he finally tells them, and then they start talking to him, and as they're talking, you know, and they ask him, they said, why didn't you ever come and meet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So he asked them, he said, have you seen him? They said, yes. He says, well, tell me about his eyebrows. Were they joined or were they separate? And neither one of them could say. Because of the jalal of Rasulullah, neither one had the strength to look at him in that manner. And so he then explains to them that they were close, but there was a small line or gap in between. And you see this in other descriptions from other people as well. Because he was looking at him from different eyes, from Yemen. Now there are other parts to his story that I'm not going to go into details right now. But eventually, again, as I said, he was martyred in the Battle of Siffin, fighting, alongside with Ali.
So was he part of the bloodline?
No, he wasn't blood related. He's known as the king of the Tabi'in. You have the Sahaba, and then you have those who saw the Sahaba, who are the Tabi'in, which is also that protected generation. So he is their master. He again, like Bilal, who excelled because of his love. Again, the same thing with OS, who excelled because of his love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I'll end here today, inshallah. We won't go over like we did last week. But inshallah, if there are any other questions, write them down so you don't forget, and then ask me next week, because we'll reiterate some of the points I made today, and then kind of go over the final arbitration issues, and the decision that was made, and the fallout from all of that, and what comes afterwards, inshallah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and help us and protect us, and may protect our brothers and sisters and our children in Palestine, all of those that are being oppressed against their oppressors, and may He take those who for whom death is written and accept them as martyrs, and for those who remain, give them sabr. And as far as the oppressors, may He give them iman, and if guidance is not for them, then may He destroy them. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.